All right, so get this. We're going deep on a true crime case today that's pretty wild.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're headed to West Palm Beach, Florida, back in 2012
Okay.
to unpack the murder of Amoria Grant.
Right.
You sent over some news clips and audio from the podcast Anatomy of Murder, Season 1, Episode 1.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Sounds good. What's really interesting about this case is how at first it seemed like, just a random act of violence.
Yeah.
Amoria was a 41-year-old nanny, tragically shot and killed while riding her bike home,
Oh.
just days before Christmas.
Oh, man.
The 911 calls, you can imagine, were chaotic.
Yeah.
Witnesses struggling to give clear details about the suspect.
Right.
It really shows how hard it is for investigators to piece together those first few crucial hours.
Yeah, it's like solving a puzzle in the dark, right?
Absolutely.
No clear motive, no usable forensics.
Exactly.
Just fragments of information.
Yeah, and it's that lack of direction that often makes these cases so unsettling. It's a real reminder that this could happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. But then, in the middle of all this uncertainty, a potential break pops up.
Okay.
A driver's license belonging to a man from Arkansas was found near the crime scene. It seemed like a huge lead, but cases rarely go in a straight line,
Right. This is where it gets tricky, huh?
Exactly.
Because now investigators have to chase this lead down.
Yeah.
Spend all this time and resources knowing it could be a total dead end.
And that's exactly what happened in this case.
Oh, really?
The guy had a solid alibi. He'd been arrested the day before for, get this, selling magazines without a license.
Oh, wow.
Talk about anticlimactic.
What a roller coaster.
Yeah.
It just goes to show, what seems like a huge clue can lead to nothing.
Exactly.
So back to the drawing board, I guess.
Yeah.
Where did investigators go next?
Well, with the Arkansas driver out of the picture, they turned to eyewitness accounts
Okay.
to create a composite sketch of the suspect.
Right.
Now, side profiles can be really tough for witnesses to remember accurately,
Yeah.
but certain features like a beard or a distinct hairstyle
Yeah.
can sometimes be really helpful.
Interesting.
So they released the sketch hoping someone will recognize the guy.
Right.
But weeks go by with no real leads. And then another shooting happens,
Oh, no.
just 6 miles away.
Wow.
This time, the victim was Jonathan Overstreet,
Okay.
also on his bike.
Geez. That's chilling.
It is. And the parallels are hard to ignore.
Right.
Both victims on bikes, both shootings happening at night,
Right.
all within a pretty short time frame.
Yeah.
So naturally, investigators have to consider whether these are connected.
Right, of course, yeah.
But it's a tough balance. You don't want to jump to conclusions.
Right.
But you can't ignore a potential pattern either.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're trying to figure out if these two shootings are linked while at the same time investigating each one separately. I bet that gets complicated.
Absolutely.
What were some of the main differences they had to think about?
One big difference was a cab driver.
Okay.
He was involved in Overstreet's shooting.
Mhm.
Overstreet said there was a confrontation with a cab driver just before the shooting.
Right.
This detail wasn't there in Grant's case.
Right.
So it added another layer to the whole thing.
Okay, so now we've got a cab driver involved. Did that help the investigation or just make things more confusing?
Well, on the surface, it seemed like another separate incident.
Okay.
A few days after Overstreet's shooting, a cab driver named Rupert Hardy reported that someone shot at his cab. But here's the thing. It happened during the day
Okay.
and involved a different kind of vehicle.
Huh.
So it cast doubt on any connection to the other shootings.
Okay, so another seemingly random event. I feel like we're going in circles. Where do they go from here?
This is where it gets really interesting. While this cab driver incident seemed totally separate at first, it brought in a key element, the cab driver himself. Little did investigators know this detail would crack the case wide open.
Hold on. Are you saying this cab driver, Rupert Hardy, might be connected to the other shootings? How did they even start to suspect him?
Well, remember how Hardy claimed someone in a black truck shot at his cab?
Yeah.
Forensic analysis of his cab told a different story.
Oh, really?
The bullet hole actually came from inside the vehicle.
What?
This totally changed things, making Hardy a person of interest in all 3 shootings.
Wow, that's a crazy twist. So the cab driver who said he was a victim might actually be the one behind it all. I can't believe it.
That's how investigations go. You never know what the next lead will be.
True.
And sometimes the smallest detail can be the key to the whole mystery.
I'm hooked. So they've got their suspicions about Hardy. What happened next? Did they go right to him and confront him?
They brought Hardy in for questioning, but here's the smart part. They played along with his story about the black truck at first.
Why would they do that? Wouldn't they want to just hit him with the evidence right away?
This is a classic interrogation tactic.
Okay.
By letting Hardy think he's controlling the story, investigators can get valuable information
Right.
and watch his behavior for any signs of deception.
Interesting.
It's a much more subtle approach
Yeah,
and often more effective for getting to the truth.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So did Hardy fall for it? Did he say anything that gave him away?
Well, he didn't confess right away, but he did start contradicting himself.
Okay.
And as they kind of gently pushed back on his story,
Yeah.
pointing out inconsistencies,
Right.
reminding him about that forensic evidence,
Right.
Hardy got more and more agitated. It was a classic example of how someone's body language can be just as telling as what they actually say.
So even though he was sticking to his story, his body was kind of giving him away, huh?
Exactly.
It sounds like the investigators were starting to close in.
Yeah.
Did they bring up the other shootings at this point?
They did. They reminded him that he worked for the same cab company involved in that Overstreet shooting,
Yeah.
subtly suggesting a possible connection.
Right.
Now remember, at this point, they weren't directly accusing him of anything,
Right.
but they were planting those seeds of doubt,
Yeah.
hoping to see how he'd react.
It's like a game of chess, huh?
Exactly.
Every move calculated.
Yeah.
So what happened when they brought up the Overstreet shooting? Did Hardy change his story at all?
He denied being involved,
Okay.
but his denials were getting weaker.
Yeah.
So then they focused on the bullet found in his cab,
Right.
emphasizing that it was a 9mm.
Okay.
The same caliber used in both the Grant and Overstreet shootings.
Mm.
And to really hammer it home,
Yeah.
they showed him the composite sketch,
Oh, wow.
highlighting the clear resemblance.
Man, they were really turning up the pressure. You have to wonder what was going through his head at that moment. Did he finally break?
He didn't. He still denied doing anything wrong,
Oh.
even said he didn't own a gun. But investigators weren't buying it.
Right.
They got a search warrant for its house,
Okay.
hoping to find the weapon that would tie him to the crimes.
So now it's a waiting game.
Yeah.
Did they find the gun at his place?
This is where police work gets super meticulous.
Right.
They didn't just rush in looking for a gun.
Yeah.
They went through every inch of Hardy's home,
Right.
looking for any possible evidence
Yeah.
that could connect him to those shootings.
Man, I can imagine that would be a really tedious process, but also kind of fascinating.
Absolutely.
It's like searching for a needle in a haystack,
Yeah.
except the needle could be anything.
Right.
A weapon,
Yeah.
a tiny fiber.
Exactly.
What did they actually find?
Well, they found a few things,
Okay.
including newspaper clippings about both shootings,
Really?
which showed he was more than just casually interested in these cases.
Right. That's creepy.
And they also found a city map
Okay.
with markings near the crime scenes, which suggested a disturbing level of planning.
Wow, that's chilling. So even though they didn't find the actual gun, they were building a strong case against Hardy with all this other evidence.
Right.
What happened next?
Remember that 9mm bullet from Hardy's cab?
Yeah.
Well, ballistics testing showed that it was fired from the same gun that killed Amaria Grant.
Wow. So even though they didn't have the actual murder weapon, they had the proof that linked Hardy to at least one of the shootings.
Exactly.
Did that finally lead to a confession?
No, it didn't. Hardy kept saying he was innocent.
Wow.
But with that ballistics evidence directly linking him to Grant's murder, they had enough to arrest him.
It's amazing how they could put together such a strong case without a confession.
Yeah.
But what about Jonathan Overstreet? Could they definitively connect Hardy to that shooting as well?
That was harder.
Okay.
Overstreet couldn't say for sure that Hardy was the shooter.
Yeah.
And without a weapon or direct eyewitness, the case against Hardy for that shooting relied a lot on circumstantial evidence. It was frustrating for investigators. They believed Hardy was responsible for both shootings,
Right.
but they didn't have the hard proof to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt.
So they have Hardy in custody, charged with Amaria Grant's murder. But the Overstreet shooting is still kind of a mystery.
Right.
What happened next? Did they just give up on trying to connect Hardy to the second shooting?
Well, this is where the story takes another crazy turn.
Okay.
Remember that arrest of the Arkansas driver?
Yeah, the one selling magazine subscriptions without a license.
That's the one. Well, turns out Hardy was involved in that scheme, too.
Wait, are you serious? What are the chances of that? It's like this weird twist of fate that comes back to bite him.
It is.
Mhm.
Investigators found one of the people who bought a subscription from Hardy.
Okay.
And get this, The witness was a former police officer.
Oh, wow. Okay, now this is getting interesting. I bet that got Hardy's attention. What did the former officer have to say? Did he remember Hardy?
He did, and what he had to say was really important. He clearly remembered talking to Hardy.
Right.
And that Hardy had actually bragged about shooting someone.
Whoa.
And getting away with it.
Wow, that's a bombshell. Did he say who he shot?
He didn't, but for investigators, this was huge.
Yeah.
It not only showed that Hardy was capable of violence,
Right.
but also gave them a look into his mind,
Right.
suggesting that he might have a tendency to brag about his actions.
So they had the ballistics evidence, the map, the newspaper clippings, and now this incredibly damaging testimony from a former police officer. It sounds like they finally had an airtight case against Hardy, even for the Overstreet shooting. What happened next? Did Hardy finally confess? So all this stuff comes out. Did he finally admit it?
Well, even with all the evidence piling up, Hardy insisted he was innocent.
Really?
He never confessed to either shooting.
Wow.
But they had enough to take him to trial.
Okay, so it was up to the jury then. What was it like in the courtroom?
The whole trial was tense.
I bet, yeah.
The prosecution presented all their evidence really carefully. They took the jury through everything, the ballistics analysis,
Right.
the map with the markings,
Yeah.
the newspaper clippings they found at his house,
Right.
and then that chilling testimony from the former police officer,
Yeah.
the one who heard Hardy bragging about the shooting.
It sounds like a pretty solid case for the prosecution. What was the defense's angle? Did they try to poke holes in the evidence?
Hardy's lawyers argued hard that most of the evidence was circumstantial.
Okay.
They kept saying the prosecution hadn't shown a motive,
Right.
and they tried to paint Hardy as a victim of mistaken identity, saying someone else could have done it, pointing out that they had never found the gun
Right.
and that Overstreet couldn't definitively ID Hardy as the shooter.
So they were trying to create that reasonable doubt for the jury.
Exactly.
Did it work?
The jury took a long time to decide.
Yeah.
Which means they really considered everything.
Right.
But in the end, they found Rupert Hardy guilty.
Guilty on both counts.
Yes. Guilty of first-degree murder in Maria Grant's death,
Right.
and guilty of attempted first-degree murder for shooting Jonathan Overstreet.
It's good that justice was served.
It is.
It's never enough to make up for the loss,
Yeah.
or all the trauma.
Of course.
But it shows that even with these seemingly random acts of violence, a thorough investigation can get to the truth.
Absolutely. This case began with what seemed like a senseless act, but with really careful police work.
Yeah.
They uncovered a pattern of violence,
Yeah.
and a dangerous person was held accountable.
And it goes to show, little details matter. You never know what might crack a case open.
You really don't. Who would have thought that arresting a guy for selling magazines without a license would help solve a murder?
It's like something out of a book. But it just shows how everything's connected.
Yeah.
And how important it is to never ignore a lead.
Exactly.
No matter how small it seems.
That's right.
This whole thing makes you think, about how chance and intuition play a role in these investigations.
It does. And it also shows the resilience of the human spirit. Amaria Grant's family, Jonathan Overstreet's family.
Yeah.
They never gave up on getting justice.
Yeah.
Their strength and perseverance, it's inspiring.
This deep dive has been fascinating.
It has.
All the twists and turns.
Yeah.
It really highlights how important it is to never give up.
Absolutely.
And sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways.
It really does.
If anyone wants to learn more about this case, check out Anatomy of Murder, Season 1, Episode 1.
Great episode.
It's a story that will stick with you. And until next time, keep those detective hats on.